Welcome to Just a Social Worker podcast with your host, Lori Eldred, licensed clinical social worker and therapist. Welcome to the podcast that's going to talk about social work in very real ways. We're going to talk about the things going well, the pressing issues and needs, and things that we really need to change about social work. I hope you enjoy our conversations, the insights, the thoughts, and even some of the actions we can take to make our profession, our lives, and our worlds better. Enjoy the podcast. Hi, welcome back to Just a Social Worker podcast. I am here with Jaxie Ferguson, who is the beautiful Instagram handle of @socialworkispolitical. And welcome. I'm super excited to talk to you and so glad I reached out on Instagram and just bugged you to come on the podcast. I love your work. So
Thank
thank you for
you.
being here.
Thank you.
Do you want to kind of just give us your background, what you've been up to, even just why social work is political on Instagram?
Yeah. So I grew up in South Carolina. For those of you that don't know, South Carolina is a pretty conservative state. Like the Confederate flag is pretty prevalent here. The first shots of the Civil War happened here, I believe. So very historical. I live in Charleston. My background, I went to the College of Charleston and have a degree in psychology and classics. And then I got my MSW from the University of South Carolina. I did a program here in Charleston on Saturdays to get my
Nice.
MSW. And
Yeah.
I currently work as a medical social worker. I have my certification in case management. So I do case management from home.
Nice.
Has been in nephrology and medical for the most part. I did do transplant for a year for my internship, and then I did school social work for a year for my other field placement. So, yeah. And the reason I started this page was last year when Kamala Harris announced her candidacy for president. A lot of people were kind of getting off the sidelines. And I had kind of been dabbling in posting more political stuff on my personal pages. It was not well received. I used to be part of a Southern Baptist church and not very popular with that population. So I was feeling kind of lonely. And I was like, if I'm feeling that way, maybe there's more social workers out there that are kind of also feeling the same way, or maybe don't have the gumption or the courage right now to post more political things, but it's in our code of ethics to be political. So
Mhm.
let's just try this out.
Mhm.
And it kind of took off from there. I have a little bit over 20,000 followers, and I guess it's been about a year and a half, a year and a quarter, something like that. So, but my followers kind of are all over the spectrum. I have a lot from South Carolina because I'm getting a little bit more into South Carolina politics right now since the midterms are coming up. And I have just some other creators that have kind of taken me under their wing, or we've collaborated on things. So it's been a really good community. And a lot of people that don't know a lot about the social work profession have kind of come out and they're like, oh, I didn't know this was part of your code of ethics. And I'm like, yep, here it is. Check it out.
It is clearly written in there. Social work is political and a real, mandate. I can't think of a better word, that we are called to be politically active. I don't know how our profession could not be. And sometimes there's a frustration of, I don't want to get political, especially I think when working as a therapist, which is a little bit different role in social work. But that even belief of like, well, I can't get political with clients. Well, there are large systemic issues impacting our clients. And if you're working with anybody with, a more marginalized identity, the systems are definitely impacting their life in terms of access to a number of things. Reproductive health care, access to like gender affirming care, who you can marry, who you can't marry. I mean, just so many things. I mean, even the social work profession, right? The Department of Education came out with a suggestion, or that they're going to change these guidelines to make our, profession not a professional degree, which is maddening. And of course, we know probably why that's happening, to limit access and or probably to get folks in who have money and probably a bit more conservative views into the profession.
Yeah, I'd love to say a little bit more about that because I do want to facts are really important to me. So I do want to say, social work was never on that list. We weren't taken off the list. It was just never on it. But the list really never mattered until now they're trying to use it to kind of safeguard who can get student loans. And I think, I don't have statistics on this, but I would say, a lot of us go into this profession because we have been part of these systems that help our clients. So, I grew up in a very poor household. I received free and reduced lunch. We used SNAP
Hmm.
benefits,
Me too.
alcoholism was prevalent, things like that. So, of course, I went into social work wanting to help people kind of navigate those situations fully on student loans to go in. I had a lot of undergraduate scholarships and grants, but, master's degrees, you can't really do that. But also, I mean, I know there's some BSW social workers out there, but a lot of the professions are now requiring you to be a licensed
Yeah.
MSW or higher. So they're definitely trying to safeguard that a little bit. And, there's still some hurdles to get through before that becomes legislation, but it should definitely be on our radar. I've seen the NASW say that they're advocating kind of behind the scenes with politicians and things like that. I don't know how that works. But the CSWE has been saying that they're kind of trying to work with people as well. So hopefully there's people advocating for us. We can also advocate for us and ask our lawmakers to, I guess the wording would be to not make financial aid or student loans based on the type of degree you're seeking.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I know, yes, this is proposed changes. So
mhm.
they're not, I think, yes, they're not taking effect now. It's just a proposal at this point in time. And they will have a time for open comments. And I'm definitely keeping that on the radar as
Yeah,
well,
for sure.
because, it is a huge issue, right? Like undergrad, the same thing. Like I grew up in a pretty poor family, single parent. I benefited from reduced and like free lunches. Probably we did not you have food, benefits or Medicaid, because fortunately I had one parent that he was required to carry us on his health insurance, but probably we could have used some food stamps in our house, just given what I remember as a kiddo. But I think there's so much there of like lots of us coming into the field have benefited from a whole lot of different programs, the ways our systems are trying to support and amplify people, affirmative action. Also, I think lots of us are coming to the field because we've had an experience with a social worker that was hopefully positive, or we've, had a family member that have, or we just have this really deep desire, often based on things we struggled with, to give back and to like help improve and like support people. I think I see social workers as this profession that like is pulling people up with them as we've been pulled up by somebody. And so I love that kind of like you look back and go, okay, let's pull you up because that rising tide lifts all boats. And I think it is important for folks to know that, yes, at the BSW level, you can get scholarships and support, but it is really difficult at that master's level to find really any type of financial aid other than student loans. And I had a huge student loan debt. I did benefit from the public service loan forgiveness program before it got gutted by the current administration. I'm tremendously like supportive of that program. I actually think it should be less than 10 years. I think you should have maybe 5, if not less. But I think if you're actively involved in the profession, yes. But yeah, it is hard to get a master's. And also now everybody wants you to have one. Like there are very little BSW jobs anymore. And if people are doing it, it's while they're getting an MSW.
Mhm.
So it's very frustrating to have kind of this limitation and looking down the road thinking this is going to, if these proposed changes take effect and these limitations happen, it is going to have a pretty substantial impact on our profession.
Yeah, I was aiming for the public service loan forgiveness. And even though I do medical social work, it's not eligible because I don't work for a nonprofit anymore. I did 6 years at a nonprofit and a better opportunity came up. So, I mean, I still have those 6 years of credits if I go back to a nonprofit for 4 years and if the program's still available then. But I don't know how it's going to happen. I know, we definitely need some reform in that area. I think social workers are kind of at the forefront of advocating for that reform, but I mean, just even the conversation that we're having, education being political as well. We know how the services and the grants and the funding from the federal government affects our schools and the
Mhm.
education that people receive.
Yeah.
The federal funding is being cut for a lot of the programs in like the rural schools that really need it. So just making it much more difficult to get kind of an equal education, which is really frustrating to see because I definitely went to Title I schools for some of my schooling and I probably would not be the person I am today without that education.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, yeah, that's again, circling back, it's like lots of us probably, had these experiences in our early years and, shaped that real desire to like give back, seeing probably the things that worked well and then seeing like, hey, this could be changed or updated or I do, think it is helpful to get government assistance to get an education because it is pretty expensive at this point in time. And I also know like the educational system itself could benefit from reforms from like how we're supporting students, how we're getting students into college, how people are paying for things, how especially professions that are giving back to the, larger community can be supported in that way. We do need more teachers, we do need more social workers, we do need more speech and language and OT and nurses, and we need people to be paid well and get good benefits and have good support. All of those are needed to keep our communities functioning well.
Right, right.
And, most of these professions are seeing a massive shortfall because people are getting burned out, they're not getting paid well, or, they're dealing with some real serious health and safety issues that they're frankly just don't want to deal with that you don't have to think about in the private sector as much as you do in the public sector. So I know you mentioned kind of there might have been an evolution of going to a very kind of conservative or being in a conservative area. And I know that probably like lots of states, there's pockets of more progressive people, but it sounds like you were in a very conservative, maybe time or place at some point in time in your life, and that has kind of evolved over time.
Yeah. So I started my MSW as what I thought was a Republican. And while I dug a little bit deeper in those classes, I was like, wait a second, like my Christian beliefs and this career path don't really go together. But I was like, but why are these my Christian beliefs? Because, if we're not going to support the baby when it's born, then why do we support the people having the baby kind of thing? Like
Yeah.
that's one of the biggest strongholds that Christianity has is pro life. And I'm like, but pro life is going to need to mean that we give services to that child and that mother and that family. So,
Yeah.
how are we going to do that? And we need to do that by enacting policies. But I don't see the conservative right or the Christians advocating for these policies. They're just advocating for the birth. So, I feel like I kind of had like a midlife crisis while I was in grad school because I
Hmm.
was like, none of this kind of goes along with what I've been taught the past few years. It doesn't go along
Hmm.
with the church that I go to, but maybe I can bring that change to the church. And I stayed there for a while thinking that. Um, but I would say the end of my first semester, December 14th, was Sandy Hook. And I was a preschool teacher during Sandy Hook with students that were maybe like a year younger than some of the victims. And I had to go back after that weekend and try to figure out how many children I could fit in a closet or how I would get them out of my classroom quietly if there was a shooting. And that totally changed my trajectory, I think. Like, I was like, I will never vote for another person who doesn't support common sense gun reform because it does not make any sense to be pro Second Amendment, but not pro children living.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that was another big thing. And it just so happened to coincide with after my first semester at grad school. So, yeah, I mean, I had to definitely challenge a lot of my beliefs. And I think grad school probably did that for a lot of us.
Hmm.
But you also had to kind of work through that because it wasn't completely accepted by my friends or my family at the time. And that's okay. I was able
Mhm.
to find other ones
It
along
is.
the way, or, they had some curiosity about it and we could have, some conversations. I was still developing those skills as a baby social work student. And I think we're always kind of developing those skills. But yeah, and I had to do a lot of like my own research about things to kind of figure out why the Bible doesn't actually say that every baby needs to be born or every clump of cells is actually a life, or, like why did that happen? Where did that come from? Another big one is the LGBTQ community. Like, homosexuality wasn't actually inserted into the Bible until the 19th. So, and we have to remember that, the Bible is a lot of interpretations of documents and stories and things that, may have been based on sort of true events or whatever it is. I'm not a theologian,
Mhm.
but having to do my own research into those things to kind of reconcile them within myself and be okay with that when not all of Christianity is going to believe the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we also forget by the Bible, it's translation. There's a lot of translation, and it's like translation of translation of translation, right? Like, when things were written, they have been translated into different languages. And there are things that don't translate over in the same meaning and context. And I think we forget that, like, this was a book written by humans who are fallible, who get things wrong. It's all men, right? And so we get only that perspective. I mean, we do get women's voices, but not as a primary. We get them as as part of the
Hmm.
storytelling. And so I think we forget that, like, the English version that we read today has evolved over time, right? Like you just said, I mean, that actually was inserted in the 40s.
Hmm.
It hasn't always been there, and
Right.
also things get taken out of context for the benefit of people in power. I think just like the pro-life movement isn't a pro-life movement, it's a pro-abortion, it's an anti-abortion movement. It isn't
Hmm.
pro-life. Pro-life really should be from beginning to end. So that should be, if you don't want to have, individuals to have an abortion, then you need to have robust, like, parental leave, you need to have robust health care, you need to have robust pay and childcare. That, I think, in and of itself would fundamentally change the United States, to have those things in place for children from the beginning. It also includes, right, continued support of the person through their lifetime, and being very much against the death penalty, because
Oh my gosh.
that also, right? I mean, that make sense. We want this baby to be here, but, right, we're also okay with the death penalty system that we also know is very fallible, is targeted towards Black and brown communities, is filled with errors. I mean, we know people have been put to
Preach,
death,
Lori, preach.
you know? Like, we know people have been put to death who have been innocent, right? We know, and probably even more that we don't know. I mean, and so it's like such a frustration, kind of with the movement and how it's been co-opted. I also, because I'm going to get on my soapbox for a minute, I also just want to add that there is also a very strong connection to white supremacy. The fundamental evangelical church was also not like this for its entirety, right? Like, the pro-life movement sprang out of anti-segregation, like the segregation movement, right? Folks down south were, right? There was huge segregation. You know this. You probably can tell me a whole lot. I've been down south, but, like, there's such a connection between the segregation movement and pro-life
Hmm.
movement. And it's like, great episode on Throughline, which is another podcast I love that talks about this very thing. I'll probably drop that link to that episode in the show notes, because I think it does a great job of, like, making all of the connections. But again, I think we're going back to all of this, like, understanding context, understanding systems, understanding that systems are created and benefit people in power, and, like, to continue to perpetuate themselves. And probably when you're going through an MSW, hopefully, program, you're getting challenged and people are giving you information, getting you to look at things differently,
Hmm.
right? Getting you to maybe even be inspired to engage in political.
I I love my program. I was very grateful for my program, especially because I was able to do it in Charleston and I didn't have to get up and move. My husband and I got married during that program, and it just wasn't really going to be feasible for us to move 2 hours away. Um, for me to continue. So I was very grateful. However, we didn't have a lot of macro emphasis. And I feel like I didn't learn a lot of this. Like we did our kind of like one semester that we did like political advocacy, but I feel like, our project was kind of like just barely touching the surface of something, We went to the state house, but we didn't really get to engage with like the legislature there.
Mhm.
I don't know, how to make it more well known. I don't know, how to talk more about these in programs. If y'all want to take me on a tour of the United States, I'll, push it into the ground. Yeah, I feel like our program could have done better, especially when we were talking about a systems theory perspective a lot. And the political system is involved in every single system that affects our clients. So,
Yep.
um,
Yep. And it's involved in every single part of our life, healthcare, education. The government definitely likes to tell us who we can be sleeping with and not, who we can be married to or not,
raising our kids,
taxes,
where we live.
benefits, right, the way we raise our kids, just the criminal justice system. I mean, all of our major systems, the government is part of it. Again, I think there's this notion of like, you can't be political. How can you not be political? Because the government is definitely, walking around trying to tell us, kind of how to function, live, and how we, kind of order our lives, right? From
Hmm.
even work, even the way work is structured. Guess what that came out of? Political movements,
Right.
unions, right? I mean, there was not that long ago that kids could work in factories. There was no child labor laws, and people were getting exposed to horrible, hazardous, like chemicals and conditions. I just read the Radium Girls book, and that, group of women, young women, teenage girls who really, because of their advocacy, they're pushing, to hold this company that was exposing them to massive amounts of radium in the paint that they were using to paint dials, like during the two wars. Like they set the stage for all of like OSHA and all of these mechanisms we have in place to protect ourselves at work, and that came out of social justice movements. So again, like if we didn't have these movements, our work even would look, kind of radically different. So it's so important for us to use our voices to create change. I do want to kind of pivot into like the way you have really taken your Instagram account. And also I just want to incidentally add, I can't believe it's only been a year since Kamala was running. It feels like
I know.
15 years ago.
Feels like we lived like 4 lifetimes since
I
then.
know we have. Can you kind of walk through like why? I think you said you started posting on your personal, and then just this evolution into, kind of the work you're doing under your handle now.
Yeah. So, I feel like the code of ethics calls us to be political. I don't have a work environment where that is really respected. Like in some work environments, you're not allowed to make statements, even if you don't have like your employer linked to your account, things like that. So, I work with a lot of very conservative nurses and I try to educate them as much as I can, but I've also been told that that's not my place in the workplace. So, I do like having the creative outlet that I feel like I can say what I want to say authentically
Mhm.
and also bring education kind of to subjects that, social workers may not know about as much, or even, just trying to educate people in a way that meets their level. And I think, social workers are good at that, breaking down things and then giving, realistic calls to action, how to contact your congressperson, when to contact them. Do you contact other ones? Things like that that are not really cut and dry. And I think, this has really helped me also to engage in my local kind of political atmosphere a little bit, getting the word out about local candidates, because as much as, we may have worked for a different outcome in our president, the things that really, in my opinion, and maybe based on fact, but the things that really are going to affect us are the local school boards. They're going to help decide how the funding goes in the school system. Our local city councils are going to decide, the taxes in the area, the resources that are available, if we get a new playground, those kinds of things. But also, your state reps decide what happens in your state senate. So, your state representatives, your state senators, even bigger than, the senators that we send to Congress, although those are important too. And, even in other states, we've been doing a lot of work around, trying to get, like if Georgia was having a special election for a senator, we would try to get someone that aligns with our beliefs to win that election too, because that is going to affect how the vote totals go
Hmm.
in DC.
Hmm.
But, it's also important to engage in those things. The local or the state legislatures are just deciding, locally how abortion laws go, how education goes, if the 10 Commandments is going to be in your classroom or not. We had a really big state abortion ban that was kind of on the table. And because of our advocacy and calling people, showing up at the state house to protest things like that, it ended up dying in committee, which was great because it was very draconian. We already have a 6-week abortion ban, but this would have been more finite, even less exceptions, things like that, and even criminalization of anyone that aids or abets or gives information about abortion. So, you know, while what this administration is doing is bad and really affecting our clients and things like that, social workers really need to get their boots on the ground locally and getting involved in like your local DEM organizations or progressive organizations that are kind of aligning more with what our clients need. And we can't do everything. You know what I mean? So, um, I personally am not really equipped to talk about foreign affairs. Like I am very geographically not smart.
Centered. You're geographically centered. You know what's going on in your area, and maybe
Well,
not in the
like
bigger
I
world.
I may not be able to list where places are in the Middle East. You know what I mean? Like maps are not my friend. So I generally don't put out a lot of content about what's going on in the Middle East. Like of course, um I think atrocities and famine and killing children, all of that is bad, and I will never stand for those things. However, the things that are most important to me is access to healthcare, gun violence prevention, and supporting families. Those are kind of the three things that I put a lot of my emphasis on because I can't do everything. I can't be an expert in those things. And also, like, there's just not enough room in my brain. And there's other people that are very good at those things. So I will always defer to them, share their content that's very factually based because I can't focus on everything. And I'm sure there's social workers out there that are very, very good at those things. And
Yeah,
I, will always defer to them. But if you need some, gun violence prevention facts, like that's my jam. So
yeah,
I'm also, in alignment with some of those groups in my area as well.
yeah. And I think folks do forget at times, like, that being involved locally, you can have a massive impact, and it doesn't have to be very big. I mean, it can be serving on a school board, but it also can be serving on, like, a planning commission. I was on our planning condition or commission, excuse me, in a small town that I lived in, and you would be amazed on the decisions being made there that have impacts on the whole entire community in terms of where folks are able to live, where folks are not able to live, what is considered industrial use, commercial, or just residential, right? Businesses coming in to communities, which can increase like economic growth and development. It can bring in more taxes. There can be more tax revenue in a city. And so it was not fancy. It was not glamorous. It was very often dry and boring in some of those meetings, and I was always, like, the youngest because this was a handful of years ago, youngest person in there, but, like, there were always times that I could advocate, ask questions, like, from a social work lens of, like, "Hey, let's think about this," or "These individuals," or "What about this exception?" Or, especially, like, things around housing, right? When we're, on a planning commission, we're looking at rezoning things like, is the housing that you're bringing in, is there going to be housing for folks that are lower income? And being able to use your voice to advocate in that way and making a pretty profound impact on your community. And towns and cities, like, also have lots and lots of, like, committees and groups that you can sit on, and serving is doesn't take a tremendous amount of time. Often it's like, oh, maybe a public meeting once a month, and then maybe some working kind of group meetings, but, like, it's generally not a huge requirement of, like, I'm putting in, like, hours and hours and hours, but it can be make a really big impact, and so I appreciate you talking about, yes, there's lots of things going on globally and at the federal government, but where a lot of things impact us is, kind of local.
Mhm.
I mean, we had in Michigan, we have the Upper Peninsula, and there was a county in there that was trying to pass a resolution that said that there are only two genders. And guess what? The UP is very conservative, but there's pockets of progressive people. Hello, if you are listening. I know that you're out there because I've met other social workers who are progressive from the UP, but right, there was some public frustration and outrage, right? Of like, this is where tax dollars are being used, number one, and it didn't pass. I think because people kind of mobilized and were like, hey, this is number one, not accurate, right? There are
Mhm.
more than one gender. There's
Right.
intersex people, people with ambiguous genitalia, like not to mention folks that have chromosomal abnormalities.
Right.
I said that word right. That's a tricky word. And so it's just like, and also, what are we doing, like spending taxpayer money to do
Right.
this when it's like that? I mean, there's a lot of things going on in our community, and I feel like that is not what was probably most beneficial because in the UP, they're struggling with housing. Housing is very expensive, and
Right.
it tends to be, kind of a lower socioeconomic area for a lot of different reasons, but like it used to be in the UP, there's lots of mines. And I mean, so things have like transitioned and changed over time, and like government needs to adapt to that. But yeah, I mean, that could have had an impact, right, on folks
Right.
living or moving to this county, or even things like that, preventing people from moving, right? Maybe I don't want to move to that county because they have something like this on the books. What is that going to mean for me, right? Are you going to be in policing my genitalia? Because that's essentially what you're asking somebody to do,
Right.
of like, pull down your pants and what is your genitalia? Because this is what, sex you should be. So it is, the local is so, so important. And I mean, there's a lot of other kind of examples I can give. And it sounds like you've really kind of learned a lot in the process of
Yeah.
there's been a lot of growth. I mean, and especially in like a year and a half to go from like 0 to like as many followers as you have, that says something. Like what you were doing matters and is really catching people's attention. So, like, what's the biggest kind of thing you've learned in that process?
For me, I think I staying authentic to myself. So authentically, I am not a person that, does name calling. I'm not really a person that finds value in insulting people. But, also having a strong moral compass is really important to me in this work. So, calling out when people get things right, but also calling it out when they get it wrong and when it's
Yeah.
not as acceptable to you. Gerrymandering has been a big thing this year. And to me, gerrymandering is unacceptable no matter what side is winning in the war because it is diluting the power of someone's voice and their vote.
Mhm.
I understand the idea behind what is happening in California, putting it on their ballot. If I was in California, it would have been a very difficult decision for me to make in which way to vote. And I know that there's people that are unaccepting of my theory behind this, and that's okay. We don't have to agree on everything. But I also know that a vote for the redistricting of California would probably be better for our nation as a whole in that instance. So, that may have helped drive my vote and my voice in that. But again, it was going to dilute the voices of some in California, no matter which way it went. And I didn't love that idea. And that's a very strong moral compass I have. I've gotten some slack from people because of that.
Mhm.
I've also gotten slack because I am a very vocal opposer of Nancy Mace. She's actually my representative, which is so unfortunate for me. But, when she came out and said that she was going to vote for the discharge petition for the Epstein files. She was one of 4 Republicans at that time that was saying that publicly, and it was before the actual vote was even close. I commended her and called her office and was like, I've actually never gotten to do this, but I just wanted to thank Nancy Mace for using her voice for, you know,
For
victims of
good.
sexual abuse and for survivors. And I had so many people saying that I was supporting fascism by saying that. And I was like, no, this does not negate every other harmful thing she has
Mhm.
done. And I will continue to call her out for those. And she may do something harmful later today that I'll call her out for. However, people are multifaceted and there has to be nuance in situations. And also, if we don't praise someone for making the right decision once, why would they make a right decision again?
Yeah.
Or, your friends that are kind of on the fence about things, if they don't see that it's okay to change your mind, then how are they ever going to feel okay changing their mind about things they support?
Yeah.
My moral compass is one thing that I feel like I've tried to keep in check. Sometimes I've strayed from it and, gone back and deleted something that I didn't love that I said or didn't love that I did. And I will definitely own up if I like accidentally give out like not factual information or, mess up in some way. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that will like ask me to collab on things. And if it's, insulting to someone or even just using names that I don't appreciate that they call people, I'll generally decline those collabs. And, it could definitely increase my followers and things like that. But I really love the community that I've created and engaged with. And my DMs are always open. And I'm so grateful for that because I get occasionally I get like something critiquing my work or things like that. A lot of my critiques come with the music choices that I make or anytime I post about Taylor Swift.
People hating on Taylor.
I know. Again, people are multifaceted. I don't love the billionaire status and I also really enjoy her music, and the things that she does that are good. But yeah, so I could have more followers and things if I altered that part of my personality or that part of my ethical moral compass, but it's just a non-negotiable for me right now.
Yeah. Yeah. People evolve and grow. That is kind of being an adult, is that hopefully you get more information, you incorporate the information, right? Sometimes it will maybe make massive shifts, sometimes not, but like I hope that I'm not the same person I was at 21 as I was at 31 and 40, one and then kind of going into my 50s. I want to be able to look back and go, that's what I knew at the time, but now I know more or I know differently or I can adjust accordingly. I think that is something we're losing touch with as an adult. Like we're going to grow and change. We're going to see something I said 5 years ago and go, "Ooh, did I say that?"
Yeah.
And then sometimes we'll see some things we said 5 years ago and we'll be like, "Yeah, that's good. I'm real
Yeah,
proud of myself for
exactly.
5 years ago." But,
Right.
I think, that is okay, and you're right, we don't have to agree, and also we don't have to, like we can give feedback. We don't have to criticize, bring people down, like, I'm there with you in terms of I don't think it's terribly helpful to be critical and to criticize people. I actually don't think criticism is helpful at all. Feedback is nice, provided the person wants to hear it. Some folks just don't wanna get feedback, they don't wanna hear it, they're not open to it, and I think it's important that we ask, like, "Hey, can I give you feedback?" Person has the right to say no, right? Consent's an important thing. And yeah, I hopefully will, yeah, you'll look back and you're like, okay, I'm growing and changing and evolving. You've done that and you're a testament to like where you started and then where you are now. And that growth has served you well, really. I mean, in terms of being able to advocate for change, to be have a good platform, to be a voice, to call out Nancy Mace, who, her and Marjorie Taylor Greene, like I give them kudos. Like they stood up and are like, we need to release these files. We need these voices heard. I don't agree with their politics,
No.
but I will absolutely every day, all day support women supporting women, women helping, uplifting, pulling up other women with them all day, every day. I will support that. You, though, with your transphobic crap, I'm not going to support that. Not at all.
Which
Because it
is
makes
very
no sense.
interesting because
Yeah.
Nancy Mace
Yeah.
used to be so supportive of the
Yeah.
LGBT community and
Yep.
that that was only a couple of years ago that she was supportive. But I also think it's interesting that it's the women that are kind of speaking out and speaking up against the administration.
Yep. Yep.
Maybe we
Yep.
have less to lose because we've had less to, are still not equal.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
it's very important or very interesting to me that it's the women raising their voices.
Yeah. I also think it speaks to the fact every woman that I know, including myself, have had some experience sexual harassment, a microaggression, sexual abuse, just some type of just being in a female presenting body. You're enduring some level of violence, period. Right? Like,
All the time.
all the time. I mean, just even the way women get socialized is a form of like control and coercion and violence. So
And,
it,
most of the comments that I get that are negative on my page are about my appearance.
yeah, yeah. Which
It's not
tells
really
you
about
then
my
there's
content.
right, it's not a content issue, it's there isn't, like that's when like, this is you actually don't have anything to say against the content because it's probably accurate, and that's the only thing you have, and it's kind of like, this is the thing, right? And I think yeah, I mean, that's a whole other conversation, but, I mean, that's a frustration, right? When you do have a platform that, folks are gonna come at you for just things that I can't control. My hair is dark brown. I mean, I could color it. I've got some pink in it now, but it's like things that you fundamentally can't change about yourself, and then you're just coming at me. Just make it make sense. I don't know. So, just kind of as we start to wrap up, what is your hope for kind of social workers who are following you? So, if you could give, kind of one or two real big hopes or real big things that you're really, wanting people to take away from your work, what would those be?
Yeah, so not everyone has to be a social media content creator. It's not for everyone, and that's totally fine. But I would encourage social workers to find a way to advocate for change that's meaningful to you. So it could be advocating for change at your workplace, like even just advocating for a more inclusive form for check in. Or it could be advocating by running for a local office or something bigger. If you decide to run for office, DM me. I would love to hear about it. And I have heard about it from a few social workers. One of them specifically was like, hey, you inspired me to do this. And I'm like, well, you are braver than me. And I will
Yeah,
support you 100%.
cool.
Send me your content and I will uplift it. Um, you know, Advocating for more of this political discussion in social work programs, I think would be helpful as well. Like I said, and maybe it was more me not absorbing it in that moment. It was a very different time in 2014 when I took these classes. So, maybe the programs have become a little bit more inclusive of the political part of our code of ethics. But if you have to learn the code of ethics for the licensing exam, I think that it should be the political part should be a bigger part of the curriculum. So, and not everyone goes into social work to be political or, I never thought that was going to be me. I was never interested in politics, but here I am like, downloading political apps and following bills and stuff for funsies. So, but if you are not, able to speak out on public platforms or things like that, just figure out a way to use your voice to
Mhm,
advocate
mhm.
for micro changes in your workplace, in your church, in your other organizations, in your child's school, those kinds of things to be more inclusive because we are all living on this planet together. We're all enduring things that people may or may not know about. And I think it just will bring us together more as a community and as a human society, to advocate for the people that may not know how to use their voice yet, because we should know. We're social workers. We took classes in it, advocacy is one of the big tenets of our profession. And even if your voice shakes, because I know mine still does at times, just trying it out and continuing to try it out until it shakes a little bit less.
Right? Field, and so you're right.
Nancy Mace is going after our public universities here in South Carolina, threatening funding if they include more than two genders on their applications and things like that. So, some colleges or programs may not feel comfortable advocating for more of that right now. But, education wise, if we're going to teach about the code of ethics, let's also adhere to the code of ethics. So,
Yep, good. And is your Instagram handle at social work is political the best way for folks to get a hold of you? Or I definitely want people to follow and share and like, I think what I've always really loved about your content is that like very like you can do this, this, and this. Like these are numbers. This is what you could do. Cause,
Yeah.
you know, I think it takes a little bit of work to try to get that process down of like who do I call and who are my kind of local representatives. I'm not sure
Mhm.
everybody always knows, but I've always loved that about your posts.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that's another thing I learned in social work is you can tell people call your reps, but if they don't know who their reps are or the numbers to call them, then it's not really helpful. So sometimes you have to kind of give people, especially at first, to make them self sufficient, some steps
Yeah,
to take. So
yeah,
at
yep.
Social Work is Political on Instagram and Threads. Threads, I'm a little bit less structured than I am on. So if you want some more fun stuff on Threads, I talk about my kiddo and the things that he says a lot and other stuff. But those are my two main platforms. I've dabbled in TikTok a little bit, but it's not my favorite. And
Hmm.
especially with like the weird stuff that's going on with it, although I'm on a meta platform, so I understand there's nuance in every situation. But yeah, my DMs literally are always open. I always check them. If I don't answer them, leave me a comment on something and say, check your DMs. I am always there to support social workers and people in general. And if you have questions about who to call, what to call about, things like that, if I don't know an answer, I will put it out to the masses and see if I can find you one. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another, I think, as we wrap, like that's another thing that I love about social work. If I don't know something, somebody does.
mhm.
Somebody knows something about something. And I'm always like, okay, it's always good to have like some social work folks in my orbit and my
Yeah.
atmosphere. So, but thank you very much, Jaxie, for joining us, for talking about your platform, for having this great discussion about how social work is political. I really, really, I think that last line of like, if we are required to learn the code of ethics, we should also be implementing the code of ethics. It should just not be this like thing I had to learn for an exam, but it should be embedded in the work we're doing, how we're talking to folks, our, activism, because social justice, service, the dignity and worth of the person,
Mhm.
competence, those are the four off the top of the five
I think
values.
service.
Yep, service, social justice, dignity and worth, competence, maybe integrity. It's always the fifth one. I'm always like, I just taught this in a class, so hopefully nobody's
Don't
listening that
don't listen to
was
the
in my
S7
class.
people, but also everyone makes
Yeah.
mistakes.
Yes, that is true. So thank you very much. I will post in the show notes the ways to get a hold of you, that link to that through line episode that I mentioned, so folks can check that out as well.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad that you have this podcast and reaching out to people and getting people to know more about social work.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you. And I know I will talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Just a Social Worker podcast with your host, Lori Eldred, LMSWC. All information in this show is not a substitute for therapy and is only intended for entertainment only. Should you need help, please reach out to 988 or your local mental health resource.